Located on the shores of West Bay Lake in the far northeast regions of Wisconsin are the ruins of a once grand mansion that was called Summerwind. The house is long gone now, but the memories remain, as do the stories and legends of the inexplicable events that once took place there. Summerwind is perhaps Wisconsin's most haunted house, or at least it was, before fire and the elements of nature destroyed her. Regardless, even the ravages of time cannot destroy the haunted history of the house. The mansion was built in 1916 by Robert P. Lamont as a summer home for him and his family. Nestled on the shores of a lake, the house caught the cool breezes of northern Wisconsin and provided a comfortable place for Lamont to escape the pressures of everyday life, especially because he was from Washington, D.C. In fact, he would later go on to serve as the Secretary of Commerce under President Hoover. But life was not always sublime at Summerwind during the years of the Lamont family. Strangely, even though the house was freshly built, Robert Lamont himself witnessed ghostly apparitions. One frightened him so dearly he shot at the specter with his pistol twice before running out of his home and putting it up for sale, yet no one bought it until after his death. After it had passed from one hand to another in a cycle of selling, one Arnold Hinshaw, his wife Ginger, and their 6 children moved into Summerwind in the early part of the 1970s. It would only reside in the house for 6 months, but during that time it would be an eventful period. From the day that they moved in, they knew strange things were going on in the house. It had been vacant for some time, but it had apparently been occupied by otherworldly visitors. The Hinshaws and their children immediately started to report vague shapes and shadows flickering down the hallways. They also claimed to hear mumbled voices in darkened, empty rooms. When they would walk inside, the sounds would quickly stop. Most alarmingly was the ghost of a woman who was often seen floating back and forth. The family wondered if they were simply imagining things, but continued events convinced them otherwise. Appliances, a hot water heater, and a water pump would mysteriously break down, and then repair themselves before a serviceman could be called. Windows and doors that were closed would reopen on their own. One particular window, which proved especially stubborn, would raise and lower itself at all hours of the day. Out of desperation, Arnold drove a heavy nail through the window casing, and it finally stayed closed. On one occasion, Arnold walked out to his car to go to work, and the vehicle suddenly burst into flames. No one was near it, and it is unknown whether the source of the fire was supernatural in origin or not. But regardless, no cause was ever found. Despite the strange activity, the Hinshaws wanted to make the best of the historic house they had, so they decided to hire some men to make a few renovations. It was most common for the workers to not show up for work, usually claiming illness, although a few of them simply told her that they refused to work on Summerwind, which was reputed to be haunted. That's when the Hinshaws gave up and decided to try to do all the work themselves. One day they began painting a closet in one bedroom. A large shoe drawer was installed in the closet's back wall, and Arnold pulled it out so that he could paint around the edges of the frame. When he did, he noticed that there seemed to be a large, dark space behind the drawer. Ginger brought him a flashlight, and he wedged himself in the narrow opening as far as his shoulders. He looked around with the flashlight, and then suddenly jumped back, scrambling away from the opening. He was both frightened and disgusted. There was some sort of corpse jammed into the secret compartment. Believing that an animal had crawled in there and died many years ago, Arnold tried to squeeze back in for a closer look. He couldn't make out much of anything, so when the children came home from school, he recruited his daughter Mary to get a better look. Mary took the flashlight and crawled inside. Moments later, she let out a scream. It was a human corpse. She uncovered a festering skull, still bearing its dirty black hair, and a brown arm and a portion of a leg. If they had been thinking things through, they might have realized that this body might have been the cause of much of the supernatural activity in the house. Removing it might have laid the spirit to rest. Regardless, they left the corpse where they found it, opting to pretend it was never there. Shortly after the discovery of the body in the hidden compartment, things started to take a turn for the worse at Summerwind. Arnold began staying up very late at night and playing a Hammond organ that the couple had purchased before moving into the house. He had always enjoyed playing the organ, using it as a form of relaxation, but his playing now was different. His playing became a frenzied mixture of melodies that seemed to make no sense, and grew louder as the night wore on. Ginger pleaded with him to stop, but Arnold claimed the demons in his head demanded that he play. He often crashed the keys on the organ until dawn, frightening his wife and children so badly that they had often huddled together in one bedroom, crying and cowering in fear. Arnold had a complete mental breakdown, and at the same time, Ginger attempted suicide. While Arnold was sent away for treatment, Ginger and the children moved to Granton, Wisconsin to live with Ginger's parents. Ginger and Arnold would eventually be divorced when it looked as though Arnold's hopes for recovering his mental state were failing. Ginger later recovered her own health, away from Summerwind at last, and she married a man named George Olson. Things seemed to be going quite well for her new, peaceful life until a few years later, when her father announced that he was going to buy Summerwind. Raymond Bobber was a popcorn vendor and a businessman who, with his wife Marie, planned to turn the old mansion into a restaurant and an inn. He believed that the whole house would attract many guests to the scenic location on the lake. They had no idea what happened to their daughter in that house. Ginger was horrified at her parents' decision. She had never given them all the details about what had happened during the 6 months that she had lived in the house, and she refused to do so now. What she did do was beg them not to buy Summerwind. Bobber's mind was made up, however. He announced that he realized the house was haunted, but this would not deter him. He claimed that he had spent time at the house and knew the identity of the ghost that was haunting the place. According to Bobber, the ghost was a man named Jonathan Carver, an 18th century British explorer who was haunting the house and searching for an old deed that had been given to him by the Sioux Indians. In the document, he supposedly had the rights to the northern third of Wisconsin. The deed had supposedly been placed in a box and sealed into the foundation of Summerwind. Bobber claimed that Carver had asked his help in finding it. Shortly after Bobber bought the house, he, his son Carl, Ginger, and her new husband George spent the day exploring and looking over the house. The group had wandered through the place, and as they were leaving the second floor, George spotted the closet where the secret compartment was hidden. He began pulling out their drawers and looking behind them, although Ginger begged him to stop. George was confused. He had simply been curious as to what might be in the drawers. Up until then, Ginger had never told anyone about finding the body in the closet. Sitting in the kitchen, later, she would tell him everything. After hearing the story, the men rushed back upstairs and returned to the closet. Ginger's brother Carl climbed into the space with a light and looked around. In a few moments, he climbed back out. He said it was empty. Bobber and George also inspected the small space and found nothing. Where had the corpse gone? Had it been removed, either by natural or supernatural forces? Or most importantly, had it ever really been there at all? Toward the end of that summer, Carl traveled alone to that old house. He had gone to get a repair estimate on some work to be done around the house and to check with someone about getting rid of the bats which inhabited the place. He also planned to do some yard work and get the place cleaned up a little. It started to rain the first day that he was there, and he began closing some of the windows. He was upstairs in the dark hallway when he heard a voice call his name. Raymond. He looked around, but there was no one there. Carl closed the window and went downstairs. He walked into the front room and heard what sounded like 2 pistol shots. He ran into the kitchen and found a room filled with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Apparently, someone had fired a gun inside of his home. Carl searched the place, finding the doors locked and undisturbed. There appeared to be no one inside, and he returned to the kitchen. He began looking around the room and discovered 2 bullet holes in the door leading down to the basement. He examined them closely and realized that they were not new holes at all, but they were in fact old bullet holes that had worn smooth around the edges. They were apparently holes left behind from Robert Lamont's encounter with the ghost in his kitchen. Perhaps events from the past were replaying themselves at Summerwind. No matter what the explanation, it was enough for Carl, and he left that house in the afternoon. The plans to turn the house into a restaurant did not go smoothly. Workmen refused to stay on the job, complaining of tools disappearing, and feeling as if they were being watched. Marie Bobber agreed with their complaints. She was always uneasy in the house and frequently told people that she felt as if she was being followed from place to place whenever she was inside. Most disturbing to Bobber, however, was the apparent shrinkage and expansion of the house. Bobber would measure rooms one day and then find they were a different size the next. Usually his measurements were larger than those given in the blueprints of the house, sometimes greatly larger. At one point, Bobber estimated that he could seat 150 people in his restaurant, but after laying out his blueprints of Summerwind, he realized that the place could only seat half that many. Photographs that were taken of the house using the same camera and only taken seconds apart also displayed the variations of space. The living room was said to show the greatest enlargement. Bobber compared his photos of the living room with those that Ginger had taken when she and Arnold moved in. Ginger's photos showed curtains on the windows that she took with her when she moved out. The curtains were physically absent in the room that Bobber photographed, but somehow they appeared in his photos. Like the incident involving Carl and the pistol shots, could Summerwind be a place where time inexplicably repeats itself? Perhaps the place wasn't haunted at all, but instead was a mysterious site where time was distorted in ways that we cannot understand. Perhaps the shadows and figures that were seen could have been people or images from the past, or from the future. And perhaps the sound of someone calling Carl's name would happen in reality, several months later. We will never know for sure, but the idea is definitely worth considering. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe. It'd mean a lot to me. And as always, until next time.